Okay, so I'll just jump right in. So like Tracy said, so I'm a nurse practitioner. My name's Jen. I do practice in aesthetic medicine in New Brunswick, and I am a PhD candidate at Dalhousie University doing a PhD of health. I've been a nurse for 11 years now, and I've also been working in research and academia for 8 years. So it's kind of, research is my love language. So this is going to be a really high level presentation to help get anyone started when they have a clinical question or a topic of inquiry that they want to explore, because I know that happens to us all when we're at work. So they want to find answers to something, they don't know where to begin. It certainly by no means replaces, the formal education that it requires when it comes to conducting research. But it might jog your memory in terms of, it's been a while since you've explored some of these concepts in your past training and education, and it'll more or less help point you in the right direction on how do we get started. So, oops. One of the reasons why I'm sharing and reinforcing this information, and one of the reasons it's so important to me, is because validating the work we do is imperative. And in light, as Tracy said, in light of the climate of nurses in aesthetics in Canada, it's really important that we are actually just supporting ourselves. So we want to, like I said, validate what we do, the reasons why we're good at what we do, and that we are well poised to do it. That is going to, in the future, support our practices and help strengthen them so that nurses become the leaders in this specialty rather than constantly fighting for our place. Oops, maybe it's not backwards. Also, being in the front line of aesthetic practice, that gives us really good insight into what needs to be explored, what needs to be changed, what we need to determine is and isn't working. We are the ones who know, and so we need to determine how can nurses be the solution. So tonight, we're just going to walk through some of the key milestones of the research process, starting right from formulating your question, and then moving through to reviewing and appraising the literature, then going to determining your methods, developing your protocol, conducting your study, and then finally ending with disseminating your findings. And along the way, I'll give you some pearls of information and a little bit of a starting point for each of these steps. So a couple key things to remember, and this applies overall to the research process, is all of the steps in that previous slide that we just looked at, they're all iterative, and all the components of those steps are iterative. So that is to say that you will be revising, you will be refining your study based on the information that you find in the other stages. And this is even more so in qualitative studies, and a lot of times we do a lot of qualitative studies in nursing. So often the answers to questions will actually end up leading to more questions, but that will allow you to take a really broad topic and narrow it down to a more specific research question. Also, research is collaborative, so it should never be conducted in silos. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of expertise to develop a thorough and rigorous research protocol in order for that also to be able to withstand critical appraisal. So we really are required to collaborate with others just like we are in our clinical practice. In healthcare research specifically, we usually try to engage a team, and this includes clinicians, and that's us, so with expertise on the topic, researchers to ensure that the study is planned and executed well, and then decision makers to help position the findings into policy. So this collaboration across practice, academia, and policy helps to bridge that knowledge to practice gap that you might remember, or the no-do gap that we see often, where we have all this information from research, but nothing becomes of it, and we don't do anything with it. So we need to, right off the bat, be able to bridge that gap. We need to turn the evidence that we have into action. As well, you'll want to engage right at the beginning as part of the collaborative work. You'll want to engage what we call end users. And this really helps to ensure relevance of what you're doing. And it increases the impact of your work. So end users are going to be those who are going to use the information that you're generating. So other clinicians, patients, communities, people like THMA, regulatory bodies. So by bringing their lived experience into each step of the planning and the execution of your study, it will make sure that the outcomes that you come out with are more applicable, they're more acceptable, and they're more implementable in the real world. Okay, so step one is basically formulating your questions. So how to take your clinical observations, your clinical curiosities, and how do you turn them into impactful research questions? So you're starting with the curiosity. Think about what you see every day. So questions your patients ask, results you're unsure about, trends you see, outcomes that make you curious. So examples that you might want to ask yourself are, what do I observe in practice? And it needs evidence. What are the gaps in guidelines or education or safety? Also, what outcomes do patients value most? So when you're starting to ask yourself these questions, it's really a clue that there is a research opportunity. And your clinical curiosity can actually really guide you to that topic and then allow you to further refine your topic into a more specific question. So I just have a couple examples of more specific questions, and those include, are certain treatments more effective for specific skin types? So that's really narrowing the question down. What are long-term effects of neurotoxin on younger adults? Narrowing again the question down. So you might remember this framework, and most people really like to block it out, but it's really good for generating a clinical question. It really covers all the important aspects of the question, all the things that need to be identified. Helps you stay focused and also ensures that everything that you do is measurable. So we use this format, the PICO format, as clinicians when we are searching the literature in order to support just evidence-based decisions. In research, this format is traditionally used for quantitative research in clinical trials, in intervention-based studies, but you can adapt the elements of this for qualitative research depending on the goals. I'm not going to go over this. This is a really good table to keep in mind, and keep this as a reference for when you want to develop your own clinical questions. So these are some examples. So in aesthetic medicine, in quantitative studies, so those are the first two examples are quantitative, the ones in purple. It might be about comparing products, comparing techniques, comparing outcomes. The third example is a qualitative question, and it's looking at patient satisfaction as the key outcome of interest. So it really looks further than just clinical results. It looks at experience, communication, expectation management, all those things that influence how a patient feels about their care. So that's kind of more what we're looking for in the qualitative studies. Okay, so what do we do next? We have a question. It's piqued our curiosity. So now we want to know what, if anything, is already known about it. So before we contribute to new knowledge, we really need to understand the current landscape. So a really thoughtful, critical literature review is what ends up setting the stage for any sort of impactful research. So review needs to be strong and systematic, and that way it ensures that the research that you want to do is built on that solid knowledge of existing evidence. So it really is what ends up providing the foundation for your study. It helps you to see what is already known and then allows you to show it shows you where your study can add new value. And it also ensures that you're not duplicating efforts, and helps you identify any of those other gaps in the knowledge. So by seeing what is or isn't out there, it really allows you to be oriented to what others have already discovered on the topic, helps you refine your focus. And more importantly, it really builds your rationale for the study, because people are going to want to know, so what? So what is this going to tell me? What does this contribute? So first we're going to search the literature. Getting into, how to do that systematically is definitely kind of beyond the scope of this presentation. There are master's programs dedicated to library sciences. So my suggestion would be to reach out to someone with experience conducting systematic or scoping reviews, and they have a good sense of what are the methods that need to be employed when you're doing a critical review. And if your review is done right, and it really does fill a knowledge gap out there, synthesizes a lot of the evidence, the results of the review might lead to a publishable result or report. So it's really important to make sure your methods are tight for your review. Depending on what kind of review you're doing, then you will want to critique your studies. And it's really important to prioritize the quality of what you're reading. That should be a priority all the time. And really, we know this, but not all information that we read out there is created equal. So stick to reputable journals that have up-to-date sources. And this is really important in aesthetic medicine, which is a really rapidly evolving specialty. So the turnover of information is very quick. Critiquing, again, is not just summarizing. You really have to be evaluating the strength of the evidence. So identifying the limitations, which the authors should identify, but that's important for also you to be able to identify, and how that might affect the interpretation of the results. There are structured tools to be able to critique the literature depending on what kind of studies you're reading. These help ensure that you're doing it consistently. And so if you have any questions or you're looking for tools to help you critique a study, just let me know, or you can email me, and then I can give you some resources as well to help you. I want to point out a couple pitfalls to avoid. So relying on outdated studies happens all the time. Ignoring conflicting evidence. So not seeing both sides of the story, failing to critically assess the bias, and overgeneralizing from poor quality studies. So it might have, a couple sentences from a background that supports what you want to say, but the overall results of the study actually don't support you. So don't overgeneralize. So keep it balanced and current. Also, don't cherry pick papers that support your hypothesis or the outcome that you want. And your credibility depends on your ability to critically review the literature. Okay. So if you're just trying to, answer a clinical question with looking through the literature and trying to find evidence in order to apply it to your practice, this is where you would stop. But depending on what you find in the literature and the questions that you are asking, this may be where your review naturally leads you to your research question, and how it needs new supportive evidence. So it really is what ends up helping make a case for your study. So we know our question, we know all there is to know about the topic, we know what we are missing, and we have to figure out how to go about answering it. So the methods we use are arguably the most important part of the research. It really makes or breaks the study. Your entire research plan of action is determined by the methods and how you go about answering the research question. So another thing to keep in mind is that your question is actually going to be what determines what methods you use. And the quality of the methods are going to be what ensures credibility, reliability, and integrity of all the findings that you come out with. So we start with the question. If it's about how much or how many or what works best, it's going to be a quantitative study. If it's about why or how or what something is like, it's going to be a qualitative study. I'm oversimplifying, but in general. A mixed method study is really going to take both of those two sides of the coin and mix them together, and it kind of gives you a richer results for your qualitative data to be able to support your quantitative data. There are entire graduate courses dedicated to just one of these methods alone. So I'm not going to go through them in depth at all, but my emphasis here is that the why of your study, so why you were doing it and then how you're doing it, so through these means, is so important to get right, or everything else kind of falls apart and your results can end up being meaningless. So my recommendation at this point would be, if you haven't already, you're going to want to reach out to someone with expertise in conducting research, be able to point you in the right direction and how to get this study going. So underneath all of these examples, and I'm pointing over here because this is where my big screen is, I have listed methodologies, or methods, sorry, that go along with all of these methodologies. So you can take a look at those. So these are the subsections of what the methods are going to be. And these are the things that you're going to need to figure out. And I put at the top, choose wisely, because like I said, all of these steps and everything that you choose is going to make or break your study. And I'm just going to briefly touch on all these areas. So data collection. How do you plan on collecting the data? Where are you going to use validated scales, structured questionnaires, interview guides, observation protocols? It's best to use a tool that is proven to be reliable and relevant. And this, there's lots of validated surveys out there, for example. These sorts of validated instruments, they enhance the quality of your study and the comparability of your results when someone wants to go and replicate the study. Then we have sampling strategy. So who do you need to collect the data from? You need to be able to define your population and then choose how you're going to pick those people. So your sampling method, random sampling, snowball sampling, you might remember these from some of your statistic courses. But really what it comes down to is you need to be able to justify why you're choosing the way you're doing it, and then justify also your sample size based on the study type. So in qualitative work, it's going to really be more about depth, not the numbers of people that you interview. In quantitative work, your sample size is actually really important because it helps determine the power and generalizability of your study, and that's usually determined by, mathematical equations. So your data analysis, your analysis method really needs to align with your research design. So quantitative data needs statistical rigor, qualitative data requires coding and theme development, and then mixed methods is kind of a combination of the two to really create that more rich picture of the phenomenon that you're looking at. And these are just some examples of what you might choose to do for your data analysis, depending on the methodology that you employ. So then we have to make sure that we look at ethics at every single step and consider what the participant consequences are. So even low risk studies in aesthetics, so things like interviews, we need to follow ethical guidelines to protect the participants. So when you are planning your study, these are some of the areas that you're going to want to account for. And a lot of times you're going to need to get ethical approval. And you will require ethical approval to publish the results when you're using human participants. And then pilot testing your methods. So some people do this, some people don't, but pilot testing saves you a lot of time and a lot of errors later down the road. So it helps ensure that your methods are practical and effective, that you're truly targeting the concept that you're interested in. So for example, you put out a survey question, you want to know, am I asking the right question? Should I be asking it in a different way? Is it clear the way I'm asking it? Am I getting the responses that I was anticipating for the phenomenon that I was asking? So it's a really good way to be able to tweak some of the methods that you're doing with a pilot test. So we're at a point now that we've done all the work, and we really just need to put it into a comprehensive document, and we call that a research protocol. So protocols are really going to be your structured plan for the entire study. It's what ensures the clarity and consistency of what you do, and it holds you accountable every step of the way, and to make sure that you are doing what you are saying you're going to do. It also is actually, in a lot of cases, required for things like ethics approval. They're going to want to see the whole protocol, and academic funding opportunities. If that's a road you go down, they're going to need a protocol for that. So these are the components. It really ends up being your roadmap. It builds the case for your study. It secures the approval of institutions that you need to go through, whether it's funding or ethics, like I talked about. And it really sets you up for your results to be meaningful. It shows you exactly how your study is going to be done, right from outlining what you know about the topic all the way to how you're going to tell people about your results. And I can't emphasize enough, and I'll say it all the time, but this is what's going to make sure that what you do is valid and reproducible. So every section of the protocol builds logically on the last. And this is work that you're doing upfront to save you time at the end. Because in the end, this is all things you're going to be writing up for potentially a publication anyway. So up to this point, we've talked about all of these steps and all of these sections. We didn't talk about knowledge translation, but we'll do that at the end in step 6. But I did quickly want to touch on the background and how that gets tied in. So when you're talking about the background for your protocol, this is where you make your case and you tie in all that reviewing of the literature you did. So it's your opportunity to show people, so whether they're reviewers or collaborators, that my study matters. It's informed by current evidence. There is a clear need for it. So it's really the why behind your research. So not much to say here. So now we're conducting our study. So if you think about research kind of as a process similar to toxin treatments, you wouldn't just start randomly injecting people without mapping out your injections, your dosages ahead of time, the sites that you're going to go. So similarly, your protocol, it really maps the entire research plan. And then all you have to do is follow it. You have to follow it, pay careful attention to it, and potentially adjust as necessary. So a few things to keep in mind when you're executing your plan and conducting your study is keep everything organized and ethical, follow your protocol precisely. If something changes, as it always does, and as it may need to, document it and explain why. Communication and transparency are really, really important, especially when you're writing up what you've done, so that you're clear to your readers and your reviewers. You also need to manage your data really well. So keep it consistent, keep it secure. And that way you have more credible results and you're following your ethics plan. So now we're at the end. We are at dissemination. However, when it really comes down to it, conducting research is only half the journey. So it doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything with your results. So sharing your findings really helps. In the end, it helps improve practice. It can help inform future research, and it positions you as a thought leader in aesthetic medicine. And that's what we're looking for, especially in nursing right now. So through means of dissemination, we translate our findings into practice. And that was kind of the knowledge translation piece that we talked about before. So we're moving them into policy and practice. And it builds your professional reputation and credibility. So I do want to point out that, we're at step 6. We're at the end of the research process. This is part of conducting a study. And so we're never really just writing a paper. A paper or a publication is a potential outcome of a study and a way to disseminate what you've discovered. So if your focus is solely on that outcome or the paper, then you're going to really lose insight of the real objective. And what our real objective needs to be is generating credible evidence. So a key consideration for dissemination is to who are we wanting to share the results? In healthcare research, we want to think of beyond academia. We don't want to get stuck in the hole of academia. So your work is likely useful for other clinicians in aesthetic medicine, potentially regulatory bodies, patients. So we want to really tailor our messaging to be able to increase the relevance and the uptake of our findings. So each method has its own advantages. Journals, writing to journals or creating publications, it builds credibility, but social media spreads awareness really, really quickly. So you really need to pick and choose what you do, or you can combine your dissemination methods to be able to broaden the reach and the impact of what you have found. Being able to effectively adapt your content to fit these different modes, and to fit the target audience of these modes, it's kind of an art in itself. When it comes to being a researcher, it's a really critical skill. So I work with colleagues and they joke that they call themselves professional writers, because without the ability to effectively write your protocol, you won't get the funding. Without the ability to write your results and publish them, you won't make any impact. And a lot of times that's an outcome for people in academia. They need to have so many publications. So the dissemination and the writing is imperative. This is also what really ends up completing the cycle of impact of the entire research process. And I know that I flew through that. And there's a lot more that we can end up fleshing out in terms of how do we end up creating all these various modes of dissemination. But I think the important thing is for people to be able to get started when they're in their clinical practice and they have a question, they have a curiosity. How do I move forward with this? And the emphasis needs to be that we need to be moving forward with our own clinical curiosities, because no one's going to do it for us in nursing. And we need to support the reason why we're here, and we are best tailored to do these interventions. It's pretty dry, but it's important. I don't think it's dry. I like it, but that's it. So if you want to message me or email me, you certainly can. If you have any questions, if you want resources, if you have those clinical questions and you're like, I don't know where to start, I'm happy to try and point you in the right direction. I'm here to support you in that way. So here's my contact information, and that's it. Tracy?